Welcome to another episode of Marriage Underdogs Radio Show. I'm your host, Chris A. Matthews, and once again, I am bringing to the show a power couple, a dynamic duo. I want to introduce you all to Sherrae and Dave Lachhu. And for background purposes, Sherrae has a background in licensed marriage and family therapy, but she is currently operating as a coach, a consultant in speaking. And Dave has an outstanding background in leadership. So this duo has come together to offer some amazing services. Just so glad you guys are here. Thank you for being on today, guys.
Thank you for the invite.
Definitely. And I always like to start with asking our couples to share a little bit about how you all got together in the relationship, and also as business partners. That's another population we target on the show. So how did you get together in love, and then how did that transition into business?
Okay, so I'm the more accurate historian and the more creative historian. I will defer to Dave to see. I'm just curious, Dave.
So we got together actually in Pittsburgh. This is my second marriage. I was married before, and during that phase of my divorce, I moved to Pittsburgh where my sister was living outside of Pittsburgh, which is a city called Charleroi.
How did we actually meet?
We met on actually Black People Meet. It was interesting because I'm Indian and I'm on Black People Meet. So
He looked Black.
So that was the first place. I think we met July of 2009.
Well, we met on Black People Meet
Yes.
July of 2009, and he did look Black, and it's Black People Meet.
Yeah.
Right.
And so he asked me, like, well, what do you think about interracial dating? And I was like, why is that a concern of yours? I was like annoyed, like, why is that a concern of yours? And he was like, well, because I'm Indian. And I'm like, oh, how many Black people think they're Indian? Like, okay, you got Indian in your family. I get it.
Right. Like Native American Indians. Right.
Yeah. So I'm thinking he's talking about like indigenous. And then he's like, no, like, not that kind of Indian, like Indian. I was like, oh, wait, like East Asian Indian? Like South Asian Indian? He was like, yeah. I was like, oh. And, initially, and I'm from Pittsburgh, so I'll be honest, he didn't present to me as, well, and let's say this, Dave's ethnicity tends to change with his hair.
Okay.
Which I think that's a lot of people. Like mine too, like my age or ethnicity kind of varies.
I don't think my look then, I didn't have any, pretty low cut hair.
Yeah, it was very short. And to me, like, I mean, Black people, we just look like a myriad of things.
We do.
So to me, and he was like slightly darker than I am. I'm like, why is this Black man asking me what I think about it? I was like, I mean, I date interracially, but it's not like a preference. I'm open. And he was like, oh, and then when I found out why he was asking, I was just like, oh, okay. And I was like, wait, you've been married before? And I was married before as well. My first husband was Latino. His first wife was Black. So I was like, so do we both have a pattern with this interracial marriage at least? And so I asked him, I was like, have you ever dated anyone that wasn't Black? And your answer was?
No, I haven't.
He's like, no, pretty much all Black women.
All Black women. That was just it.
Yeah.
So
well, Dave, I'm in that same camp, Dave. So we got but
we're magic.
Yes.
And that's one of the beauties of having you on this show, because for those that follow our show, Marriage Underdog is based off of about 10 characteristics that identify with research would indicate higher levels of divorce. And you both fit two of those criteria, where you're in an interracial marriage, but you also had previous marriages as well. Mm-hmm. And when you think about the data points, right, like 41% of couples tend to have a greater chance of separating or divorce in their first 10 years, according to a study based on data collected from the National Survey of Family Growth, if they are of opposite races or cultures, right? Can you speak to the listeners and share some characteristics or tips that you guys applied in that courtship and dating phase, which prevent you from being one of those statistics? Because based on the manifesto you wrote and just seeing you guys online, some of your interviews, it sounds like you guys have figured it out.
It was work.
Wait.
Yeah, on my part, she already did the work on her. I had to actually do the work on myself.
Got you.
So, and that's where, and I wanted to do the work. So, and she was like, okay, well, I see you want to do the work. So this seemed like this will work. So I was, with intent, I want to work. I want to be a better husband. I want to be a better father for my kids, just a better individual overall in society. Because my past from the previous relationship, I wasn't too proud in how that went. So I just wanted to change. So she's like, well, you got to do the work. I was like, okay, I'm willing to do the work. And from then on, start going to therapy, talking, reading, just learning about myself more. Just didn't know anything about myself, just living life and just moving on, But yeah, so that was the first step for me, is learning about myself, learning about her, her needs. And, in my past relationship, that was never the case. It was just, I was just a provider. Now, in my second relationship, I know how to value a relationship. I know how to connect more. I know what love is. I had no idea what love is in my past relationship. I was like, it
Just
was
in
never
life.
just life.
Yeah.
It was never there. So she actually taught me, like, no, this, you haven't lived, this is what love looks like.
And Dave, you make two amazing points. The first being that you had to be willing to do that work on yourself. And I'm hearing intentionality. It wasn't something that was forced upon you. It was something you had to choose yourself. And then the second thing, you talk about how you in your first marriage were just a provider. And as men, we hear that word providing, and we tend to only think that providing money or economic security is what we're responsible for exclusively. But I'm hearing you say now, through that work, you've learned to provide connection, attention, time. You've learned to provide all the ingredients that actually create a loving marriage. And I want to ask you, Sherrae, during this process where you see your partner, he's willing to be vulnerable, he's willing to do the work on himself. Talk to us about the level of patience and understanding that it took, because I'm sure as a therapist, you had already done a lot of that work, or you might have been in the midst of it as well. But I want the women and men out there listening who might meet a partner that may be at a different level to understand what it takes to exhibit that patience that you might have provided Dave with during that courtship phase.
Sure. One, I'm going to give the audience a disclaimer. I'm real raw with it. So Dave knows that I'm super honest and truthful and blunt. So what I will say is, one, I think there is this expectation when you're a therapist that you will naturally be patient. You've naturally done your work. You naturally know better. You have more emotional intelligence. And as someone who has been in the field for, this year made 24 years, I will say the mass majority of us, that is not the truth. We have learned theory, we've learned technique, we have not embodied it. So there's often not that authentic change, that transformative experience that lasts. And so I think that there's that undue weight and burden that you can feel as a partner when you are a therapist, for example, or a coach, or anybody in a healing profession, where there's this expectation like, well, you get it, right? You can read me. And so that caused an emotional imbalance in our marriage. We had some other imbalances, but that was really one that I felt, because the truth is, thank God for the gift of empathy, and also the gift of empathy, especially when it's literally one of my giftings, when you feel it that deeply. I would know when Dave was disconnected. I would know when it had nothing to do with me, but that his heart was aching. I would know when he felt despair. And Dave could be smiling. Dave was a very good masker. We're both neurodivergent. I believe ADHD and autistic. And so we both were very, very good at masking, but I could read Dave's heart. I could always read Dave's heart. Now, the positive about that is that it gave him a home to rest in, to know somebody saw him, felt him, sensed him, believed him without him speaking, and prayed for him. And and held him down, right? The challenge is that is hard. I knew that there's a chance that that would never be reciprocated at the same level, not at all, but at the same level. And even though I knew it cognitively, it was very hard to come to terms with it. And it's still difficult at times. I told him sometimes it's a grieving and growing that we go through. When it comes to us being from two different races and cultures, I think our dynamic was a little bit different because Dave is Guyanese Indian. And so he grew up in a very, and I don't care who hears this because your family knows I feel this way. He grew up in a very racist family with a lot of anti-Blackness. However, they always lived amongst and were really close friends with Black people, right? He's from Georgetown, Guyana. So they always had Black neighbors, always had Black people that they're friends with. They have Black people in their family. So the mixed race people are called Dougla, right? So they have Black people in their family. But there is that anti-Blackness that unfortunately has been poisonous to everybody, even Black folks, right? There's a belief that somehow we're less than.
And you make a good point, because even within Black families, you may have a darker skinned sibling or relative that is outcast, and they're the same bloodline. So I just keep going, but I just want to make that point. You're right. It even happens within Black families too.
All the time, and even within their family. So Dave was, I don't think you were the darkest, but at the time, living in Guyana, he was one of the darkest of the siblings, and he was outcast, which is why he felt community with Black folks. So I will say this from my experiencing, and Dave and I have talked at length about this, because the one tip that I'll say that's a very tangible tip that I recommend for people and all the couples that I work with or we work with that are in interracial or interethnic relationships. One of the things that I always recommend is make sure that you understand the power that you hold and the biases that you hold, implicit or otherwise. Make sure that you understand that the same way that the worst male chauvinist ever has internalized patriarchy and misogyny, so have most men and women who have been raised in a misogynistic society. Same thing with white supremacy. Same thing with anti-Blackness. We've all in some way been exposed to the poison. And so when you are in relationship with someone that is from a different culture, you have to understand that even though you don't mean harm, if you haven't done your work, harm will come out. Prime example, what was this, a year ago? The Costco incident, about a year ago. And this is real life for Dave and I. So Dave and I are super open about, and probably me more so, he just learned to be open with it.
You follow your lead.
Right? We're super open about the things that we experience, because the truth is nobody wins when you sugarcoat stuff. Nobody wins when you filter stuff. So the truth of the matter is that's
Sherrae, before you share, because I want to hear the Costco story. I'm really Costco has great stories, I'm sure. But you said something earlier I want to go back to. You said the bias and the power. Right? I get you did a great job talking about the bias that we may have, but go back to the power part.
So the power dynamics are important. And so I'm coming more from a lens of intersectional feminism, for example, right? So when you think about, people think about feminists, they think about bra burning, but really what it is just what you think about with like DE&I, just equity and inclusion, right? And so in that same vein, when you think about the intersectional aspects, it's the other things. So like it could be poverty, if somebody has money, if somebody doesn't have money, someone has more education, if someone is from a different race or a different culture. And so there's these other intersections that are there. Somebody has a different sexual orientation or something. And so for Dave and I, the power dynamics that needed to be, I'll use this as an example to further illustrate the point. The power dynamics that had to be acknowledged, and I actually called it out, was that how it ties into the Costco story is, as a Black woman, I don't get to be viewed as soft very often, even though I'm only 5 foot. Like this guy towers over me, I'm 5 foot even, right? That's it. And so even though I'm a wee little bit, I don't get to ever feel sad. Like, for example, when I was at Pfeiffer, I remember a professor said to me, well, you can kind of have a chip on your shoulder. And I had never heard that in my entire life, because everybody, I'm a pretty affable
So what were they implying? They were implying because you're an African American female that it's okay for you to
I was going to them
in a
about
different
something.
way.
Yeah, I was going to them about something. I was sad about it. And I was actually displaying disappointment and sadness. And they took it as aggression. And I could have a chip on my shoulder. And it was somebody who I respected and valued. And I felt very hurt and harmed by that. But those types of microaggressions are unfortunately what we get slapped in the face with. Now, so the thing is, as a man of color, Dave does have certain understanding because he is a man of color and he's a darker complected man of color. So he does get discrimination and he gets bias. What he doesn't understand is he understands it, but what he doesn't always have front facing in him is the experience of being that person who is looked at as inferior by all. So, and when it comes to power dynamics, there's a hierarchical thing, right? There's a totem pole. Even when I remember I did my master thesis on professional Black women in marriage, and I was asking, is there a crisis? It was more hypothetical, but it was being talked about a lot back then. And one of the things it said back then in 2010, the research was saying that Black women ranked lowest out of all men sampled in this particular quantitative study as the least desirable.
Wow.
That's hard.
Now, Dave, when you hear your wife mention that statistic, your wife just described, based on the research from that time frame, Black women were appeared to be the least desirable. You and I both completely disagree with that because we have phenomenal Black spouses. But outside of our personal liking for Black women, do you ever feel this sense of or need to protect your wife? Have you ever had that moment where you felt as if it was your duty? Because you think about men, protect, provide. Share your feelings, Dave, on that. As you hear your wife describe the microaggressions that Black women encounter, all of the things she's sharing. What's your take on some of that?
It's interesting because when she mentioned it to me and she said, like, I'm gonna have some implicit bias coming from a different country or how I view things. When she told me, I was like, wow, I didn't realize that, or things I may say or mention and how it may be perceived to her or other folks. So I was like, well, how do I protect you? Because I don't know how to do this. You know, like, what does protection look like? You know, I know, like, if I'm going to a store or something, if there is more Indians or somewhere where I will feel I'll be more favorable, also let me go and do this.
Gotcha.
When she spoke about a Costco incident, that was a prime example. I didn't really was there to protect her because I don't know what that was. I didn't feel that.
Go ahead and tell the story. The Costco.
She does a better job with the story. Go ahead and tell us.
So the story, wait, this is bothering me on your eye. So the story was, we went to go sign up for a membership. It was very late. We were running in. There was a very tall, fair complected European woman, like she was from Europe, somewhere, Ukraine or somewhere, I don't know. Very thick accent. And she was asking me if I wanted a membership. Her manager came over and asked if we wanted the membership. We said we wanted the membership, but we wanted the basic level. They kept trying to upsell, but they were talking to me because my husband was like standing back, just watching. And so this woman continues, and it's like closing time is coming. We're coming in for just a few items. And I said, listen, I understand what you're offering. We don't want it. We want the basic level. We really have to go. We have things to do. And I said it just like that. And she was like, yeah, but I'm just trying to tell you because blah, blah, blah. And I was like, listen, the store is closing soon. She was like, it's okay. No, it's not. Like, I want to go. Like, so I'm agitated.
I don't want to be here. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we finally get the stuff and we walk over, and you know, she has to take the picture, and we leave from the desk. And I turn to Dave and I'm like, can you believe that? Like, oh my gosh, this was ridiculous. He was like, yeah, but babe, you know, you were a little harsh. You were a little aggressive with her. Skirt. Skirt. What anti-Blackness just came out of your mouth? What? Yeah. Aggressive? First of all, I can be aggressive if needed, if warranted, if I'm on the defense, but that was not aggression. That was exhaustion. I was really literally tired at the time. We were doing fertility treatment. I had to go in the car and take my injection in the car because she had wasted so much time.
Gotcha.
And so I had just had a client, of a Black woman, a white male that I see, and for therapy. And she had just told a story maybe a month or so prior to that about her not feeling protected.
Hmm.
And he was like, kind of like saying, well, I could see how the neighbor said this, and it was a white female neighbor. And so I told him, I said, do you realize what you just did? And he's like, no, what's wrong? And I was like, I'm really angry right now. I don't know if I can talk. I gotta wait. Like, I had to get my words together
Yeah.
because I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel protected. And this guy, like, I trust him with my life. When I was in the hospital, when I had surgery, this is the man who waits on me hand and foot. When I worked a job at a methadone clinic and had to be to work at 5 a.m.,
Mhm.
he woke up at 3 a.m. to get me ready, to get my lunch prepared while I showered, and to see me off every single day, even though he didn't have to be to work until 9 a.m.
Wow.
And so this is the guy I count on. And so it felt like it came out of nowhere.
Right.
But this is what happens when you don't do the work consistently. And that's for both parties. There has to be discussions about expectations, and he has to continue challenging any implicit biases. If not, he could unintentionally do harm to me. And that's what occurred that night.
Yep.
And there was so many layers to it as well, because you don't just have the gender, the race, but you also have just you see this too, Sherrae, I know, with couples feeling like your partner's not on your side and feeling like that teamwork is gone. In that moment, it's almost like, why are you agreeing with the enemy? You know, not using that word directly as enemy, but it's like, you're supposed to always be on my side. And then we find sometimes it's not even the content, it could be the tone. But really, you know, I talk about tone, timing, and topic, right? So the timing also played into it. And I'm sure, you know, Dave, I want to get your experience, because after that, you can also find in these moments value in next time. Anytime I'm working with couples, I always highlight next time. You know, obviously it doesn't ever feel good to cause discomfort in your partner, but the beauty is that you'll have that lesson and you'll remember it for next time. So Dave, talk about the next times, or what did that experience produce in you all in terms of becoming a stronger couple?
Yeah. Well, we did, and one of the things we do a lot is process. Sherrae liked the process, so no, we processed, and she was like, let's just talk about what just happened, you know. And so I had to process and try to understand from her lens, like, okay, what did I miss? And I understand her. Okay, yeah, I did drop the ball on this, you know, the way how I look at it from my lens. So it was a learning experience for me. Now I'm a little more vigilant when things like that happen, or if we're in a situation like that. I know how to show up for her, support her a little better. You know, how to take charge, like, so babe, let me take over, let me do this, instead of putting her through that, or just be supportive, you know, just in the whole process. If she wanted to handle the situation, let her, but still be there and be supportive, and, you know, during the process. So it was definitely a learning experience for me. I didn't feel good about what happened after she explained to me how she felt. I felt real messed up. I was like, wow, this went real left, and I didn't really think nothing of it. So just from how I look at it, introspect, it was totally wrong. So I had a better understanding of coming out of that situation,
moving forward. And that's providing a lot of hope for couples, because I just love what you just said, showing up for her.
Yep.
And we can show up for a lot of different things in our life, but we have to ask ourselves, one, are we showing up for our partner? And two, what does our partner see showing up looking like?
Yeah.
And we could think you know, Dave might have thought, I'm showing up because I'm driving the car and I brought you here and I didn't even want to come to Costco, but showing up in different areas. So when you said showing up just now, that really hit. I want to learn more from you guys when it comes to certain tools or techniques. Like, if you had to give 3 suggestions for couples that are entering interracial, interethnic relationships, things you might not have known that you know now when you guys started dating, what are like 3 or 4 quick tips you could just say to these couples that are in these relationships to make it a little bit easier on the back end for them?
I would say accountability, reciprocity, maybe 2 more.
Accountability and reciprocity.
You took mine, first of all.
Well, I learned that from her, actually. She's like, these are the things that are required in a relationship. So I didn't know anything about it. She's like, and she would preach it to me almost every day, like accountability, reciprocity. There's one word that you mentioned, and we talk about integrity a lot. So integrity was one of them.
And I think overall, and yes, when I was, ladies, when you were dating, it was very important for me to set the tone and foundation. My expectations mean I expect accountability and reciprocity in all my relationships. Reciprocity meaning mutual respect and understanding. And this is what it looks like. And so we led with that. But when it comes to interracial or interethnic relationships, I think one of the major things I feel like when we're talking to couples and even in processing our own things, I would say is don't assume you know, because like, for example, he was in a marriage, and prior to marriage, I think the total time you were with your ex-wife, maybe 18 years total, they were together. Nobody had called out his anti-Blackness because guess what? Everybody doesn't have the same understanding, awareness, or expectations. And so just because you are familiar with a culture or an ethnic group, or you know something, or you feel like you're not prejudiced or you don't discriminate, that doesn't mean that you don't also practice or carry harmful practices of some sort. And so that's a big thing. Check your implicit biases. A lot of times they'll come in comments made like, if somebody says something and they assume somebody's Black because of this, or I assume this because they're Guyanese, or something like that.
It goes both ways though too, right?
It goes both ways.
And that's the part I want to highlight, because you are describing how definitely Dave wants to be mindful, but at the same time, once again, accountability. I love the fact that you're processing, even in the statement, the accountability that you had to also be mindful of his culture as well. Absolutely. And you're putting it into practice in real time.
Yeah.
So I want to highlight that.
Which to incorporate. It wasn't a great situation with us, with his family, because of the racism and anti-Blackness and just the overall lack of respect with and for Dave. And I talked about that in that piece that you talked about earlier. But that wasn't my place initially to say what I wanted to do. And I feel like when you are dating in these spaces, encouraging the growth and development, trying to get in and learn not just the culture, but the culture of that family. I think that's the bigger part. Like there's the culture overall, but then there's the culture of that particular family. And are we taking that into consideration and being observers? Absolutely. And so one of the big things that we did was we had discussions about what parts of our culture are integral parts of how we want our marriage to be, even like around traditions and values and stuff.
So you really created a subculture. You took the cultures that you both were used to. And that's something I hope couples are listening to, because when you get married, you're producing another family. And sometimes couples say my family. Well, you become a family of two unless you brought kids into the marriage.
Yeah.
So you become a family of two unless you brought kids in. And that was hard for a lot of couples to understand. Even myself, when my wife and I got together, we'd already had our son. But I just recall there were a lot of teaching moments and we had to create our own culture. And one of the things you said earlier that you and Dave went through, which I appreciate, you both highlighted this. You were able to be each other's teachers and students. Mm-hmm. And that's a part of marriage I think a lot of people don't take in consideration. You have to humble yourself to learn from your partner and learn about your partner. Yeah. And I'm hearing Dave in that moment with the Costco incident, there could have easily been a lot of defensiveness, right? But the fact that Sherrae stepped back, it also looks like that space or that time gap where you could collect yourself produced a moment for Dave to kind of already start anticipating and reflecting on, okay, maybe I could have done something wrong. Okay, what's going on? And I think the tone, right? Because I also heard, Sherrae, that even when you educate Dave on who you are, what you need, there's still a level of respect that you're demonstrating.
Yes. That's non-negotiable in our marriage. Like, even when we get contentious with each other, which, listen, y'all, after 14 years, 10 plus years married, we do have points of contention. And I'll be honest, I tell people this the same way I say it about things like suicide. Never think you're safe from everything ending. So because he's the closest person to me in the world, and because I think the world of him and he thinks the world of me, doesn't mean that we take for granted that our marriage will still be intact next year. It's about a grace to God through faith and through hard work, because as each new level of each of us individually happens, that needs to be synthesized with the collective us, so that we're not, one of us isn't feeling left behind. And so there's again, grieving and growing. And so when it comes to how culture and how race has impacted us, the bigger impact, I would say, other than like the things that have been internalized, the bigger impact in our relationship was more about the work that we had each individually done with ourselves. The truth is, I knew Dave was brilliant and I could learn from him when I met him. The truth that was also evident after some time was that Dave felt the same about me, but couldn't see how I felt that way about him.
Got you.
And so that was the struggle.
Communicated, right? And when we think about communication, every single client, I'm sure you've heard this too, a couple will call and they'll say, we need to work on communication. And we have to stop and remind ourselves what communication looks like. It's the sending and receiving of messages, right? It's transmitting messages back and forth. And those messages aren't just verbal, they're nonverbal, they're emotional. There are a lot of different components that we put together to produce a message, and our ability to accurately send those back and forth. And I use the word accurately because that's where the understanding piece comes into play. And Dave, earlier you were talking about how your wife loves the process. It's really like the decoding. And Sherrae, you mentioned something I want to highlight on. You talked about how you don't ever want to get to a position where you take the relationship essentially for granted. And I use the term or the phrase about starting the relationship over every day. Every day, my wife and I reset the relationship. The marriage starts over every day. And initially, I brought that to a partner's attention in therapy by way of a joke. I was like, you could buy your wife a house, a diamond ring, and a car, and then tomorrow she's like, so what you gonna give me today? Right? Like there is no real stockpile in marriage, right? But there isn't. Like, you can have an account that you build up of trust. You can have an account that you build up of experiences where when your partner and you do have moments of contention, you can go back and make a withdrawal, polite withdrawal, and the account doesn't go to zero. But what you're saying is to keep the intentionality on the fact that it's really a slippery slope in marriage. And we see it all the time. Like, can you guys talk about the coaching you do and how you've helped couples who may have been on the brink of divorce or have been contemplating a breakup? Give us some insight on some tools, techniques, strategies that you've been able to provide those couples that might be on the ledge of calling it quits. Yeah.
You want to take this first?
Yeah, I guess for us, from my experience, is accountability. But like Sherrae is my accountability partner. And I was like, if there's anybody that I want to correct me, it would be her, and to go out there and have somebody else correct me. So I had to make myself be vulnerable to the change and to be corrected and to receive it. So that's
Dave, where did that come from? Because, you know, as a lot of men, you know, our egos get in the way of that, right? So what was it about your wife that produced in you the agreeability to say, you know what, I want my wife, I'm going to accept my wife as my accountability partner, right? Because you still made that choice to allow her to be in that role. So talk about that for a second.
Well, before that happened, we had to develop that trust. And it takes some time when we first start dating, because it was very hard for me to trust in anybody, pretty much. So she was actually the first person I actually trust in my whole life. So I had this much confidence in her, like, okay, this is somebody I trust. And that's where that came. And I was like, well, I know she wouldn't guide me wrong. She wanted the best for me. I want the best for her. She haven't told me anything that wasn't true. She don't lie to me. So this is somebody I have confidence in, and this is who I want to have as my accountability partner. Would it be hiccups? Maybe. I haven't experienced any of those yet, but yeah. So I would say the trust started, and then the accountability part. Okay, so I can start growing from there. So that's how that process started.
And that's important for men to hear, because when you find a partner, men and women, when you find a partner that you trust, and mind you, you did the work, so you had to go back to your family of origin and lineage and identify where you may have lost the ability to trust. But after you did that work first, second, you then were vulnerable enough to allow your wife, to allow Sherrae to take that place and hold you accountable. But to the other points you made, Dave, Sherrae had to have been consistent. I heard you say that she didn't lie to you. And sometimes in relationships, we think small lies don't carry marital weight. I didn't hear Dave say she didn't say any big lies. I heard him say she did not lie to me.
I lied one time, and it was a small lie, and I never lied again after it hurt him. It impacted him. It was just, are you home? I'm home, because I was running late per usual, being ADHD, and I was at my friend's house. He said, why am I home and you're not here? For somebody who's had previous trauma and been cheated on, that's a huge thing. And so when I got back home and I realized how he felt and how he experienced it, I wasn't gonna be arguing. It's not a big deal. And I was just at Chrissy. It didn't matter. What mattered was I wasn't honest with him, and that could have potentially really harmed him. I mean, he did feel harmed by it. So I apologized and I said, listen, I'm sorry. It'll never happen again. One of those things where you say, I'm leaving out now, and you're still in the shower type thing. I can't do that with somebody who hasn't found anybody who they could trust. And then you blow that trust in that way. So when I say he hears the raw truth, even sometimes when he doesn't want to hear it, I don't think there's every time he doesn't. I guess, yeah, there are times he doesn't want to hear it. He's like, please shut up. And I'll still say it. But the part that Dave, I think men could benefit from this, because I would always ask Dave, how was I different? I'm not the most patient. He says I'm patient. I'm not the most patient, to be honest. And, he says things like, well, you're a beauty, you're intelligence, blah, blah, blah. But I really wanted to know, what was the difference in you feeling like you could trust me? Because he does open up emotionally. It still takes sometimes a little prying, but he'll open up. And what he mentioned then.
Real quick, ask him that question. I know you know the answer, but ask him when you hear him say it.
I'm going to see if he says the same answer he told me all those years ago. Do you remember what you told me, the reason that allowed you to be vulnerable with me and open and honest with me?
I felt safe. And I trust you, and you was honest. Yeah. So, but mostly the safe space. You created a safe space for me. So the safety was what matters.
He didn't say the same answer, but it's the same gist of it. What he said then was, I modeled the vulnerability. I demonstrated vulnerability with him and openness, and I would own my own. Like I told him in my previous relationship, which I came from a very not good, abusive, toxic first marriage. And I told him, I said, but I realized too, I could be emotionally manipulative because I was being not cared for and neglected and things. And so I might start crying, and then my ex-husband would turn around and maybe not leave. And then after a while, he was like, I don't care if you cry. But then I realized, well, what does that say about me? There's emotional manipulation, and it doesn't matter to what end you're doing it for. It's deceitful. It's a form of deceit. And so I had never been like that with Dave, but I expressed it to him. And I said, I want to protect you by telling you that this came out as a trait when I didn't feel safe.
And it goes back to the foundation of you doing your own work, though, because you had to do your own work to identify those patterns, characteristics, and Absolutely. Then you both chose to break them and create new patterns, rituals, routines In other words, you talk about grieve. What was the other?
Grieving and growing
Grieve and growing,
simultaneously.
right? So you both had to grieve two people, not just ex-partners, but
The
yourself.
lost we once were.
Yeah, the people you once were, and then you grew into other individuals that came together. So I think that's so important to highlight, right? Like I'm gonna make sure we title this episode "Grieving and Growing," right? That's perfect.
That's what
Now
happens.
I've really enjoyed the time with you because you've both dropped so many amazing nuggets, and we were able to explore not just the intersections of a multiracial, multicultural marriage and relationship, but you talked about doing the work first and then hitting two of those major core marriage underdog characteristics, having prior marriages. And all those listeners out there who've been married prior, it can evoke hope that you can get it right the next time. And that's so important as well, because we had Dr. Anthony Chambers on the show, and he talked about how with each new marriage, the chances of divorce actually increase. But it sounds like the difference is that you've grieved those old people. So if you stay the same person, then the new marriage may not work. But if you choose to grieve that old person, you technically are not having a second marriage, you're encountering your last marriage.
And we felt like that. We felt like I felt like I was married before legally, but it was not a marriage until I met Dave. I didn't have a husband and I wasn't a wife until I met Dave. It really felt like a reawakening. And I think the one thing I do want to leave the listeners with is not only is it important to do the work, but it's important to remember that when you choose not to do the work, because it is a choice,
right?
You're making a choice to impede and impact the marriage.
Wow.
So and that's something that we've experienced within our marriage.
So breaking that down, the reason why that's so important, because a lot of couples will come into counseling and their agenda is to have the counselor change their partner.
Absolutely.
But what you just said is what you bring into the marriage can actually alter that system.
Absolutely. 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 So the work has to be done. This is the reason why I tell people couples work is great, but who are you? Have you identified who you are? And then there's certain things we have to understand the differences between men and women. Everyone needs to know their purpose, everyone. And though the difference is men outwardly who don't know or don't feel fulfilled in their purpose will feel aimless. Women can mask it better. It's not that both don't need to know their purpose and have clarity around their purpose. It's that women can mask it and they find other things that they can do instead, whether it be mothering or being a wife or doing charitable efforts. It still comes out. It all comes out in the wash. So eventually they still say, I don't feel like I know what my purpose is. But a man being successful in his relationship can be derailed when he hasn't intentionally sought out his purpose. What has God intended for his life? Who is he? Who is he supposed to be?
You are so spot on. Like, I needed that for my own marriage in the sense of just hearing you say that, because, I think about how my wife and I are both in these transformational seasons where she's in grad school, she's, contemplating going back to an old career. And you're right, because she does such a phenomenal job still sustaining her roles as a mother, sustaining her roles as a wife, that I don't see that quite as heavy. But if that was me, or when I go through my transformations of identifying new opportunities, things are a little shakier. So I really love what you just said. I think that's going to give so much value to the people listening, because we both need it. Men and women both need it. But a man may respond completely different, and then it bleeds over into that relationship and it's seen different by that partner, and it can evoke or shake up some emotional volatility that you may not see from the woman's side of things.
Absolutely.
That was gold.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. I want to make sure, Dave, you have any final tidbits or tips or tools, and then segue into making sure you both have the opportunity to share with the listeners all the amazing work you're doing, how you can be located, contacted, social media, projects. But before we do that, Dave, I wanted to give you space to share any final thoughts or tips that you may have.
Yeah, well, thanks for having us on the show. We really appreciate you. Thank you for your time in this space, this connection. This is wonderful. But like throughout your program, you was talking about how men can improve themselves and doing the work. You have to do the work for yourself. You can't do the work because somebody else wants you to do the work. Whether it's coaching or whatever you're doing, therapy. Another thing to remember is a lot of times a lot of childhood trauma traveled throughout your life. So it comes up in your 40s, your 50s, your 60s. You may not know that, but it does a lot of things when you recess back to. So doing the work and getting those feelings and whatever out that happened, it helps you in your relationship. That was something that I had to work on personally. But yes, so doing the work is definitely, you have to want to do the work. And be committed and have an accountability partner to hold you accountable. I think that's important. Honesty and integrity will follow there.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you, as a fellow man, can say that, because it's important for men to support each other as well. And when you talk about doing that work in mental health, and it's also important for partners to support other partners. And that's the beauty of the show, to be able to see a marriage like you all. And just thank you for being vulnerable to share with us the transformational process, the grieving and the growing that you both have gone through. We want to make sure that everybody listening has access to all of the amazing projects that you are currently working on. So please share with us all of your business endeavors and how listeners can get in contact with you.
Sure. So if they want to book a complimentary consultation with Dave and myself for couples coaching or relationship coaching, they can hit us up at love-acceptance.com. Go to our website and just send something through the website stating that they would like a consultation with us both. They can also get to me at my first and last name, sherraelachhu.com. And that will take them there if they want to do life coaching, consultation, any of those things. Dave and I actually have a couples workshop that we are planning for later this fall. That was one of the things that I actually have been really feeling led to do. But one thing about the work that we do and the work that our business does, part of our brand is authenticity and integrity, to Dave's point. And we honestly were not in a space in our marriage last year where we felt that that would be healthy for us to do a workshop like that. We just couldn't have done it. I couldn't have done it. He couldn't have done it with integrity and authenticity, because we were in a tight time in our marriage. And that will happen. You'll have those ebbs and flows.
Right.
So you need to be discerning in what you're putting out when your marriage is really thin.
Right.
And it may not be able to handle it. So I'm glad that we thankfully are on the up, and we're in a space where we can hold space for other couples to do the work with other couples, and also to do these workshops. Hopefully we're looking at maybe in the spring of next year, we would love to do a luxury couples retreat. We're still scouting locations. We love to travel. We have a virtual business where we took 3.5 weeks a couple of years ago and went up and down the Gulf Coast of Florida while doing sessions. So we were beaching and working. We called it a workation. And so we want to have other couples experience that with us. You can do work and you can do all the things, especially other couples that are in entrepreneurship, because we can hold space and support those couples as well.
Love it. Love it. You guys are doing some phenomenal work, and I'm sure that everybody listening today will have so many takeaways they can apply to their marriage, and more importantly, their own personal growth and development. So Sherrae, Dave Lachhu, awesome. Hope to have you guys on again. We definitely got to do another episode where we can dive a little deeper. For everybody listening, you've been tuning into the Marriage Underdogs radio show. I'm your host, Chris A. Matthews. Please leave reviews, comments, likes. You can find our show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Once again, Chris A. Matthews, look forward to you guys tuning in next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate you.
Thank you.